President's answers to questions submitted by members of the Council on Economic Development. From the Blue Room of the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, D.C., May 9, 1963.
Glad to take any questions just for a few minutes if there's anybody who might have them.
Mr. President, the present rate of unemployment is the most disturbing problem to us and to you. Do you have any suggestion in the tax reform area which is intended to provide a direct, and I emphasize direct, incentive intended to encourage taxpayers to employ more individuals, either for business or personal reasons?
I think that our general thesis has been perhaps more indirect than your question suggests. Our feeling that the economy, if sufficiently stimulated, that we could reduce unemployment to the figure of 4%. Now, there will be some hardcore structural unemployment in eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, particularly the coal and the steel centers, which will not be substantially aided by the tax bill or even by the general rise in the economy. I do think, however, that if we could reduce unemployment to 4%, then those programs which are specifically directed towards these centers of chronic unemployment where it's unlikely private businesses will go. I'm thinking of some of the older coal mining areas which are not particularly attractive from the point of view of markets, communication, or any of the rest of the things which cause a business to move. It may be possible for us to then be of more assistance in retraining, perhaps in trying to steer defense contracts if we have high unemployment, though that's increasingly hazardous. And one thing and another, we may be able to make a further dent. But I would say that generally the tax bill is directed towards aiding the economy as a whole, which we feel will ease the burden of unemployment, but may not finally get at these long-range, hardcore problems, which are going to be with us, I'm afraid, for some time.
Mr. President, I happen to represent a segment of the steel industry which has not raised its prices. Matter of fact, where prices have been constantly going down, and my question is this. We are paying something over $4 an hour, average wage. I've just come back from Europe where they're paying about $1.60. And what in your economic program will permit us to compete successfully with very well-operated mills abroad who are now shipping and selling in this market at 30% under domestic prices?
Well, it depends, of course, on which particular product we're talking about. We have attempted to protect the domestic steel industry from dumping, though, as you know, it's a complicated case to prove, and it has not been proved with success this week. But we will continue to take every step we can to prevent any steel being sold in this country at a lower price than it's being sold in the domestic market. Secondly, while it is true there's a wage differential, this is true of a good many other commodities. We have many other advantages in this country which we have been able to which have enabled us to more than make up for the disadvantage of, at least productively speaking, of higher wages, raw materials, techniques, and all the rest. One of our problems, of course, has been that they are operating at full blast. They have a good deal, in some cases, more modern equipment than we have had. We're operating at a rather large overhead because of unused equipment. I think that if we can get the demand for steel up, and with the combination of the tax bill of last year and the tax bill of this year, so that additional investment will be put by the steel industry into new plants, I think we'll be able to protect ourselves. Now, I know that steel has taken a sharp drop as far as its export, and we've had a sharp increase. It still is a relatively small percentage of the domestic market, however, and we will continue to watch that, and it will continue to be a matter which will be before us in the next 12 months when we begin the trade negotiations with the common market. We hope that the efficiency of our domestic industry will protect us, and it is a fact that we've enjoyed a general trade surplus over the last years, not in steel, and but nevertheless generally. Now, I can't guarantee complete protection for steel. We can't just sell abroad. We sell a good deal abroad, more than we import. And it may be that there's going to be certain types of steel that will come into this country, and we'll find it very difficult to compete with them. I would think that the percentage, however, of imports to the total domestic production will still remain over the next months and immediate years ahead relatively small.
Mr. President, I am interested in the impact on the economy that the investor-owned utility industry in America can have at this time, and would like to ask one question about it for your comment. The investor-owned electric utility industry has the largest investment in plant and equipment of any industry in America. Each year, it makes the largest annual investment in plant and equipment of any industry in America. And it is the largest taxpayer of any industry in America. I know around this country of a number of projects involving hundreds of millions of dollars of new capital expenditure, which would be carried out immediately if it was not for the position of the administration, which I am quite convinced is adverse to the electric utility industry in America. I'm wondering if you believe that a more favorable attitude towards that industry might not be a stimulant to the economy, which would be highly desirable at this time in our national situation.
Well, to make it more precise, what is it in the attitude of this administration which has had this adverse effect?
The points I have in mind is that there are certain very major projects in this country which cannot go forward either because of the desire of the United States to try and build a federal project with taxpayers' money, or because of the opposition of the United States to the building of certain projects in this country.
Well, let's pursue it just a few steps further. Which projects?
The one in which we have a partial interest would be the High Mountain Sheep Project on the Snake River in Idaho, which is just below the famous Hell's Canyon project.
I'm glad to see that all sense of private initiative has not been lost in the public interest which you gentlemen so vigorously pursue. Let me say that the standard which I have always followed was that if a private company, that the burden of proof should be on the federal government, that if a private company can develop a site and provide a service more satisfactorily than the federal government, then the private company should go ahead. Indeed, as I said, I would put the burden of proof upon the federal government to prove either that the site will not be adequately developed, that the service would not be satisfactory, and that only the federal government can do it before I would support the project. Now, the fact of the matter is that the electric industry did very well last year in the tax bill which passed the United States Congress. It is making, it's not only large but also prosperous. Its investments, as you pointed out, are substantial. And it may be that on some sites, such as Hell's Canyon, which I recall in the 50s, or other sites in the 60s, there'll be disagreement about who should develop a site. But I'd be glad to look at that again. But my judgment, the standard I will use is the one I've described. I think even with that standard, there'll be occasions when we'll disagree. But I think if you look back over the last 30 years, that the public development in power really has not adversely affected the private power industry, that the last 30 years have been years of great investment, substantial profit, substantial return, and that there has been a place for each, and I assume will be in the future. But I'll be glad to look at this particular project with your special interest in mind.
Thank you, Mr. President.
What's wrong with keeping the spending at the level it'll achieve in this year? Why will that affect a net reduction in employment?
Well, if we're talking about the 64
fiscal year
budget,
64, yes.
Fiscal 64, the coming budget, which
yes.
was about $4.5 billion higher
up, yes.
than the 63 budget. As you know, and you know almost better than anyone, all these, the fact that, I'd say two facts. First, that our defense expenditures went up, and they went up by necessity. We provided in that budget a $4.5 billion increase. $1.5 billion was a pay rise, which was essential. There were, in addition, other expenditures for the defense because we've increased the number of available divisions from 11 to 16. We've increased the standby forces. We've increased the number of Polaris and all the rest, so that it was just physically impossible for the Secretary of Defense, even though, as you know, he cut $13 billion from the service request, to cut it any lower. As it is, we're going to have to postpone some very much needed housing, and the pay increase, which will finally pass the Congress, I'm afraid, will be less than our services need and less than the civilian increases of the last 5 years. It was very difficult. I think it's been impossible to have cut our defense expenditures very much below the level that we sent them up. In addition, there were expenditures for space. Now, this is the target of opportunity for the budget cutters this year. And I think it would be a great mistake for us to make such a nationwide commitment. That program which we are embarked on, which isn't really just putting a man on the moon, but mastering space, had almost unanimous support last year. There wasn't really almost any opposition in either party and in the country. Now suddenly, because there's a dropping of public interest, we want to decide to postpone our program and move it ahead at a much slower gear. I think it would be a mistake. I'm confident the Soviet Union are going to make additional spectacular efforts in the coming months, which will cause a tremendous onrush of public feeling that our program is too slow. Already we have dropped behind in Gemini, as you know. There was a story in the paper this morning, almost a year. To maintain our original program would have required a supplemental appropriation of $500 million, which we did not ask for. You have to make up your mind that if you cut this budget in space by $1 billion or $2 billion, you are making a definite judgment that the United States will continue through the 60s to be second in the field of space. I think we can afford to make the effort we're making. The third item that was increased was interest on the debt, which, as you know, was refunding obligations which are coming due, which had paid a lower rate of interest because they were incurred in the 40s. Now, those were the increase. The rest of the budget was the same figure as last year, and that is very difficult. This country is increasing around 3 million people to 4 million a year. That means you're going to have 1.5 million, for example, more postal deliveries every year. You have a good many people on old age assistance. You have a lot more children who need assistance and all the rest. I think that to hold it even is really very difficult, and you can't certainly do it another year because it just puts the burdens on the state. You can take any state in the Union, the state of Virginia, which is fiscally prudent. If you take the number of employees, its debt, and its expenditures over the last 15 years have risen percentage-wise much faster than has the federal government. So, Doctor, you should know, as I say, better than anyone, how easy it is for people to say to cut the budget without realizing that, and going into detail, without realizing that the budget as a percentage of population and the budget as a percentage of gross national product is quite constant for 10 years. It's in the 16.2 or 3% for 10-year period. So I don't regard this as an excessive budget. I don't think you can do what you suggest unless you are determined to cut space and defense by the $4 or $5 billion. Now, I don't think that we should have done that even from an economic point of view, let alone from a program point of view. Nearly every business economist, as well as academic economists, in the summer of 1962 said the chances favored, and most businessmen, the chances favored a recession in the fall of 62 or in the winter of 63. We did not get one, but to have cut the level of government expenditures by 5 or 6 or 7 billion or even 10, as some suggest, in my opinion, would be a serious mistake at a time when the rate of investment was still submarginal, and which was really the reason why we did not reach the gross national product figures that the Council had predicted some months ago. It's because in 62 there wasn't the rate of investment. So I think that until we are sure that we're not going to move in this pattern that we moved in 58 and 60, a very frequent recession, I want to be sure that we don't have the federal government deflate and therefore have an adverse effect on an economy which may be hanging in the balance. So to answer your question, I really think from the program point of view and from the expenditure level that our figure was just about right this year. Thank you. Thank you very much.